And we welcome you to Brown and White Ventures, and we are welcoming you this podcast from the main manufacturing center of KAV helmets. This is Whitman Kwok, and we are glad you're joining us for Brown and White Ventures podcast today. Of course, this is the podcast where we introduce you to not only our portfolio companies, but also talk about venture capital and innovation and technology and new companies. And we are doing this in the name of Brown and White Ventures, which, as you may know by now, is a venture capital fund formed by alumni of St. Bonaventure University to invest in companies across the region and also beyond it in order to invest in new companies that are healthcare and technology and manufacturing, and companies led by women and minority founders, and also to find new companies, new opportunity in the footprint of the institution that this venture capital fund wishes to support by making a charitable contribution of 10% of its net profits to St. Bonaventure University. And with that, we introduce you to Whitman Kwok, who is the founder of KAV Helmets, which was the very first company that we invested in at Brown and White Ventures. First of all, thanks for letting us in. This is the coolest place. Folks, every time they see it, they just can't get enough.
Oh, of course. Thanks. I've been looking forward to this all week, so thank you for inviting me.
We are in Buffalo now after KAV's arrival from Silicon Valley.
That's
and,
right.
And the story is one of the great ones in Buffalo here when it comes to the startup environment here. We are talking about a company that came from the West to the East, and nobody would have thought that was possible. Why was it possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably know the answer. Anyone who lives here would know the answer. It's always about the people, right? And as great as Silicon Valley is with respect to technology and software, we do have an aspect of our business which, at the end of the day, is a physical product. And I think there are very few places in the world that you can find people who take pride in craftsmanship and delivering just a great end product to our customers.
KAV is a microfab company that is specialized and born by creating absolutely custom-made cycling helmets, and not the kind that you find at your neighborhood sporting goods store. We're talking about the kind of cycling helmets that are made for cyclists, and you may know some, and those who are watching this who are in the cycling community, you know that you're not putting 100 miles a year on it, you're putting 100 miles a day or a week at least, and you are someone who's committed to the sport. And this is your passion. This is really something that was born from your interest in the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I think every entrepreneur story, every genesis has a seed of passion. And for me, the marriage of cycling, that's what I love. One of the few sports you can also use for commuting, right, getting places. But also saving lives, like my kids, as many of our people we know, like play sports, and over the last decade, I think we've become much more aware of concussions and head trauma, and this whole idea of the microfab was born from building a better business, the unit economics, which we can talk about, industrial sovereignty in terms of being able to manufacture in the U.S. again. But from the consumer side, it's just building fundamental better products, something that you're excited to ride and wear. And cycling is just the first of many areas that we're going to be saving lives in.
Do you remember when you first began with cycling as something that really connected with you?
So, I grew up from relatively modest beginning. My parents were immigrants, and unlike a lot of my high school friends, when I did not have a car to get to places, and I often took the Yale school bus. And so the bike for me represented freedom, right? I mean, in the same way that I think most teenagers would think of driving or even Uber, right? Just being this extension of being able to go wherever you wanted to, whether it's run errands, socially, being with people. But for me, there was also the aspect of just the rush I got from riding. The endorphins and the satisfaction of self-propulsion. And I'm an engineer as well. And cycling is one of those sports where you can geek out as much as you want around the tech. And I think you start seeing that in how that's influenced our product development. The details matter, and we spend a lot of time there.
We're going to talk about that engineering career of yours before you get to KAV
Sure.
in a little bit. But the idea of how this is made, and folks have heard us talk about how KAV makes helmets with, frankly, AI, your iPhone or your smartphone, and the kind of manufacturing you are actually not hearing right now. I mean, it's happening, but you can't hear it because it's silent. And we're talking about 3D printing. This is a tremendous way to make goods locally, regionally, certainly domestically, but it is also an incredibly efficient manner of manufacturing.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, there's very little waste in terms of we're not like at the end of the day, one of the impetuses of the company is minimal or no inventory, right? Work in progress, and that has a huge ripple effect in terms of benefits. One is in retail, typically it's pretty common to have like 25-30% like dead stock, right? Just wasted things that either aren't sold or heavily discounted or just end up in the landfill. But even as you work backwards, there's this incentive once you have inventory to mass produce and bulk produce, and then you start looking at overseas production, long supply chains, which now we have experienced between COVID and the last year of just the brittleness of that. And it encourages companies to innovate less because you've sunk all this time and cost into getting like 100,000 units, right, shipped over a container. And for us, the beauty of this is we have agility and flexibility to make exactly what the customer wants, and we can take feedback and incorporate that into better products very quickly.
KAV helmets really coming to life in Western New York through the 43 North competition. It was a winner in year 9. We're going to learn more about that from Whitman Kwok and learn more about this company's next step here on the Brown and White Ventures podcast after we learn more about Miracule. Miracule is a biotechnology company developing RNA therapies for cancer and muscular dystrophy. Its approach to drug design revolves around using genomic patient data to create highly tailored therapeutics made to help patients live a life free from the debilitating symptoms of their disorders. Miracule's proprietary Dreamer platform utilizes genomic and outcome data from thousands of patients to identify underlying genetic changes that cause their disease, and then create a novel RNA therapeutic that can directly target and fix that genetic abnormality. Learn more about Miracule at miracule.com. Safety, health, and the enjoyment of cycling is really part of what KAV helmets and Whitman Kwok have been working on for several years now. Let's go back to the idea of why safety and how you've made these more safe, and how the individual is really able to do this on their own as they order from KAV.
I think for us, it's just a core mission of the company to protect people, right? And that was the impetus, as we talked about earlier, in the genesis of why I personally felt this was worth the investment. I wanted to protect my kids, selfishly protecting myself and my friends, but recognizing that in our market research, like, this is core, that protecting whether it's yourself or your loved ones, just critical. So what we also realized simultaneously, and we maybe don't talk about as much, is that the design and aesthetic and other attributes are at least as important as safety. Because at the end of the day, a safer product isn't worth much if it isn't adopted by the general populace, right? And so we invested quite a bit in our design. We made a decision very early on that it would be a polarizing design, that you would either love it or find that it was different. And if you found it was different in a not a good way, there were 100 other helmets you could buy that would protect you less well, that would meet your aesthetic. And our goal here was, for the rest of the population that wanted something unique, looked great, just in a different way, and had all the safety features that we have built in. So,
have you ever fallen while cycling?
Many a time. Ironically, not since I started the company. So that may be a good omission, or maybe I just jinxed myself. But no, up until then, I would probably get in a crash maybe every other year or so, and some of them more serious than others.
People who've never been in a cycling fall, where their head and their helmet come in contact with the pavement, they have no sense as to how serious that is. I literally had that happen for the very first time, not far from where we're sitting.
Yeah.
I cycled the length of the Erie Canal from Fairport, New York, right into downtown Buffalo.
Yeah.
And I got in front of my final destination, and literally my tire went into the rail line, and I fell, and I mean, I would have cracked my head pretty good had I had a helmet on. The helmet cracked, which is something that happens with these helmets. You know these from the falls. Can you help us understand how you've made this safer?
Sure. So there are two things here. One is the design itself, and then the other is the materials that we use. They work together to basically create a more effective crumple zone, right, to absorb impact energy. And concussions they found are really caused by two kind of vectors of energy. One is the head-on collision, which is like if you've ever watched the car collisions and the front of the car crumpling, right? That's called linear pressure or impact. The other is a tangential, meaning with your head specifically, there's been a lot of research showing that it's not just your brain, for example, hitting your skull that causes concussion, but it's actually the twisting motion causes rotational and stresses on your synapses and neurons. So let me address both of those independently. So our crumple zone is about 3 times more effective than a traditional EPS. Specifically, when you use foam, it will compress about a third of the way before it hits a process called densification. As the name implies, what that means is the foam compacts to the point where it doesn't want to compact anymore, and you only get about a third of the distance. So if you can imagine your car suspension and only having a third of the travel, right, your ride would be much harsher. The other piece of it is that we have a mechanism built in the helmet that allows the layers to slide between each other. And so on impact, instead of your head rotating, the shell of the helmet, or I should say one of the layers, actually shifts and absorbs that energy. And so between those two is how we get our top ratings from studies like Virginia Tech.
As you've been listening to Whitman, you've probably noticed that the black boxes behind you, those are the 3D printers where these helmets are being made. How does 3D printing help this work?
Yeah, so a couple of dimensions here. One, the materials we can use are our own proprietary. The second is the design. So we use an advanced honeycomb structure, and that honeycomb structure actually turns out to be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to manufacture with traditional methods. Specifically, when you injection mold a part, you have to have a way to release that part. The hex structure we use is so intricate that it would not be able to be released from the mold. And so it's not capable. So the 3D printers allow that, and so it allows us to do much more sophisticated designs than you otherwise would. And the third is it makes it practical for us to do a custom fit. And the custom fit has 2 benefits. One is the helmet will stay on your head better, right? So in the case of an accident, it won't roll off or fall off your head in a way that a traditional one might if you have the straps too loose. The second is that the curvature of the helmet matches the curvature of your head. And most people can kind of then picture the pressure on an impact is spread across your entire head, as opposed to in a traditional helmet. By definition, when they're limited sizes, you're buying a size bigger than your head and then clamping it down with the fit mechanism. That means that you have a point load targeted wherever your head meets the helmet, and then put more pressure and force on that point of your head.
And that custom fit is actually created by the person who's ordering. They take a single image of their head, and from that, what happens?
Yeah, so we're taking a single picture, and what we found early on, of course, is that as great as a product is, we didn't find too many customers who had the conviction of shaving their head in order for us to get those measurements. And the other common way of getting head measurements because of hair is to put what's called a head condom, right, like a swim cap that compress your hair and then do a full scan. We just found that very clumsy and not a very good user experience. So we developed an algorithm that uses machine learning and AI, and it's actually using facial features and a bunch of data points besides taking a full scan. And we're actually able to extrapolate and create a virtual rendering of your head that's extremely accurate, and in our experience, more accurate than someone scanning, because you have a lot of user inconsistencies, right, in holding a camera and taking lots of pictures or video in an unevenly lit room. And so then we translate that into virtual head form, and we literally build a digital helmet around that. We create what we call the KAVs for that. We transform those into what's called STLs, which are just meshes of those files. And then we have a slicing program which converts those into individual layers that the 3D printer can then manufacture and build up to the actual helmet.
Whitman Kwok's KAV helmets, starting in Silicon Valley, but arriving in Buffalo a couple of years ago, just this past summer, arriving here full-time and permanently where the manufacturing center is, its headquarters is. Tell us about your experience here in Western New York and how your idea of manufacturing really captured the imagination of not only venture capital, but those who are creating the new ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's what was attractive to Buffalo for us, and I think why Buffalo found us attractive was it wasn't just about building KAV or some startup. It's about an ecosystem, creating the network and infrastructure for the next era of manufacturing. I don't think it's any surprise to anyone how competitive it is to do traditional manufacturing compared to overseas. There's a reason why many companies do that. And so what we want to do is just leapfrog that rather than trying to play catch up, build out a whole new technology stack where, frankly, the US as the lead, that we have lean into the areas that we're really great at, which is software development, material science, and then the people here that are craftsmen, right? And not just labor, but really have a sense of process and the marriage of old world techniques and new technology. I think this building itself is almost symbolic of that. It's the old Barker Lounger manufacturing, making those kind of lazy boy chairs with a lot of old school tooling. Now we have the juxtaposition of this beautiful brick building and the tradition here with all the advanced manufacturing technology that we brought.
Right here in the old First Ward of Buffalo is where KAV helmets has been set up. You can hear it barely. The 3D printers are whirring. The craftsman that Whitman referenced working just beyond the camera angle. We're going to tell more about how Whitman's experience has really brought us to this point and how he's going to leverage that experience to take KAV to the next level very shortly. Right after the Brown and White Ventures podcast continues following this message about CounselStack.
CounselStack is a legal operations platform built by and for lawyers, powered by large language models. CounselStack performed best in all categories in the most recent survey of legal AI platforms, outperforming 8- and 10-figure companies in accuracy, authoritativeness, and authenticity. CounselStack centralizes research, document review, form auto-completion, and timekeeping into one system. Law firms use it to move faster, reduce headcount, and serve more clients with fewer resources. Learn more at counselstack.com.
And we are glad you're with us. Jim Aroune here on the Brown and White Ventures podcast with Whitman Kwok from KAV Helmets, and a gentleman who has had significant Silicon Valley experience, not only as a software engineer, but as someone who's grown in understanding how business is best done. And you bring what from that era of your career to KAV as you push it out of the nest on your own, with the help of investors, but really driving it the whole way.
Yeah, I think one of the things, this is my sixth startup, and Guidewire was fortunate to be a part of that early on, from $1 million up to $1 billion in revenue. And one of the things that's so attractive about software is just the unit economics and the efficiency that can be gained. I've always loved building things, like physical things, background in aerospace as well, and the cycling industry that we talked about previously. And my dream has just been, how do you marry the best of both, right? How do you have all the benefits from a business and efficiency perspective of software, but all the joy of seeing people using your product day in, day out, not hidden behind a phone or a computer screen. That's valuable, but there's something intrinsically wonderful, right, about seeing your product out there. And so from the get-go, we had architected this company to marry the best of those both worlds and stay in the digital realm, to the very last mile before we had to print it. And so we've invested a lot of IP. Although people can see a lot of these machines, these are all very inexpensive machines. For anyone who's into 3D printing, these are the equivalent of hobbyists or desktop machines, and that's intentional. We actually invest in software, our own software to basically run these machines, and what that allows us to do is have kind of a negative cash conversion cycle where we're getting paid for the helmets before we have to invest in any hardware, and that we can have really great margins so that we can hire the best people and invest in R&D to make the best, safest products for people. And I think that's really unusual in the physical manufacturing space.
That's the exciting part about this business.
Yeah.
As compared to anything else that comes along. I mean, you arrive in the age of AI where everything's AI, and so there's no sizzle there. It's effectively nature at this moment.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think in a traditional manufacturing company, like a lot of your investment is in the tooling of the factory, but unfortunately, that investment isn't necessarily something the user or customer ends up benefiting from, right? Our investment is in the core product itself, right? The software, the impact technologies, the aero testing that we do, the time we spend in focus groups, getting feedback on the product. And so it's a very direct benefit, right, to spend the money there. And then these lightweight and capital light on the hardware side. So, yeah, I think we're excited by that, and it's fun. We were able to just make a lot more product too.
Cash Positive arrives in 26 along through KAV's primary helmet business. You came out with the original. Aroune arrived earlier this year, and it's out now with this magnificent orange helmet for safety in the dark times of the calendar. And there's another helmet that's going to be arriving, and we are shifting and adding an entire new realm to your production cycle. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we've created a brand not just in cycling, but we've had a number of folks in the construction industry who have either ridden our bike helmet or just familiar with the brand and said, I want that for not my weekend bike ride, but for the 8 hours a day that I'm working on a construction site or in the factory. And recognizing that that whole industry is now shifting to what's called Tech 2 helmets, which are just more focused on impacts on the side, recognizing that a lot of workplace injuries are from falls. And I think we're uniquely positioned to use the technology platform and designs that we have and translate that into a whole another market, one that's 10 times bigger than cycling, and therefore gives us 10 times the opportunities to fulfill our mission of saving lives.
How are you making the pitch, really, that there is value in this higher end, more highly produced helmet as compared to the ones with the plastic fringe in the center that you kind of and fall off of anybody's.
Right, yeah. So we're fortunate. We invested from day one in our impact lab, so we do significant amount of testing and more than I say our competitors. I think someone I'm familiar with, and but we also benefit from a time now that Virginia Tech does independent testing, and we leverage that to communicate all the investments that we make in safety. And so on the construction side, we're seeing 3 to 6x improvement, and this translates to the bottom line of construction companies because the workers' comp claims and injuries to employees are reduced so much that we're seeing 8x kind of ROI despite the price, of our helmets.
So this the construction aspect of your manufacturing strategy begins soon or now.
So we have a number of national, international construction companies that we're entering into paid pilots, and we're looking forward to equipping their team members. And as we always do, like having the humility to know that the feedback will make it even better helmet when we make it available to a broader set of companies.
You have a wonderful family that we've talked a lot about over the months that we've been together. when you go home and you gather around the table and you talk to them about the work, what do you think you're able to offer to them as takeaways from your experience making this particular company happen?
So many, I think. But I would say above all the day-to-day experience of what I learned, whether it's engineering or saving and whatnot, is just the work ethic. And I think this is not something I speak to, but more that I found that they've seen because they've communicated back to me, which is doing something that no one else is doing that the world needs. And those two go hand in hand. You should always be doing something that the world needs. But there are many things you could do that would otherwise get done by somebody else, either because it's easy or it's competitive or whatever. And I think what they see with KAV is it's a non-obvious way to make the world a much, much better place. Right? That the marriage of everything we talked about, the people, the technology, the materials, the advanced manufacturing, all tied together in a nice little bow to make these products that save lives. It's not something that otherwise would happen, or definitely not on the time scale that we've been executing against. And the second is that it's a lot of work. It's hard work. But if you actually want to make a difference, you do have to put in that work. And I think I'm very pleased that they've applied that in the sports and their studies and in their careers. My wife has probably actually had an 80% influence on that, but I'll take the 20% that I've had on that.
The founder today that arrives in this world where, first of all, the technology is not just racing, it's blinding. And where it used to take quarters, it seems like it takes quarter hours to catch up, right? Your advice to people who are trying to do something in this world beyond the work ethic that you've recognized as effective by your own practice?
Sorry, can you rephrase that question? I want to make sure I answer the right.
A startup founder ought to consider what?
Oh, advice for a
in this
startup.
moment, knowing that the tech and the IP is going to have to come so much faster than perhaps ever.
Yeah, there are many obvious answers. I'm going to give the non-obvious one, which is do and compete in a non-obvious space. And the reason is exactly what you said. And I recognize this early on, as many hours as I like to put in. I recognize in my age that trying to compete on raw output with some teenager in a garage who's drinking Red Bull my day, like I can't outcode that, to your point, right? And that's what you have in the AI industry right now. It's a swarm mentality. Like there's going to be a small number of winners inherently in each of the respective solution spaces, and it's going to be a lot of capital that's going to get lost in that, and then someone will emerge. For me, I want that outsized power law success, right? That you desire, the $100 billion company exit. But I want to increase my chances by picking areas that are overlooked. And what that does is it buys you time. It buys you time to build a good company, to build the right culture, to do right by your customers, and find great investors like Brown and White who recognize the value of doing that. And it's not for everyone, but it is for me, and I think that's what we have in Canada. That's why I would advise any entrepreneurs, be careful not to get sucked into the whirlwind of what's currently hot, and do what actually is important, that does have a huge market, right, but maybe is somewhat tangential or hidden from my eyes. It does make fundraising more difficult because you have to tell that story well, but I think it's worth it.
You found so far, KAV. Congratulate you on the success you've had so far.
I will also leave on that fine note. 2026 is going to be a bang-up year for us. We've invested so much to get to where we're at, and all our partners, including who, of course, know this. And this is the year that we will be launching, taking advantage of all that, launching new products, reaching new, all our metrics and saving more lives. So definitely look out for us. Thank you.
Yeah, great. And we're glad you spent time with us. We look forward to spending more time with you on the next Around the White Ventures podcast. We'll see you then.